Thanks for watching. Did you know you could get sideboard guides on patreon.com/CaliKais? And did I mention you can get early access to videos on the YouTube page in the membership section? If you want to pick up these cards, you can check out cardmarket.com. And if you like these videos, make sure to like and subscribe. Hello and welcome to another Pauper video. I'm CaliKais. Get ready for State of the Format. This is going to be a video describing the Pauper format, the metagame itself, how things match up, and what basically give you a small primer on each of the decks here. I've pulled from I've pulled from MTG Goldfish, the Pauper metagame showing all decks from the last 30 days. Now we just got Jund Wildfire classified, so this is pretty accurate. This is going to give us an image of what Pauper looks like right now. So I've highlighted here by tiers based on vibes on power level specifically. The tiers here are, you can see that it's already organized by MetaShare, so you don't have to worry about that. Now I've organized it by what I think is the tiers. So tier 1 / tier 0 would be Grixis Affinity, Jund Broodschale, and Golgari Broodschale. In my opinion, the two most powerful decks in the format are Grixis Affinity and either of the Broodschale combos. That's because these have the ability to just win, and Grixis Affinity has been the powerhouse of the format for a very long time. Everyone that's playing Pauper has to respect these decks to the extreme, that their sideboards are fully geared against these, or their main decks. Now, if you organize it into just tier 1, that becomes a 3-deck format of Burn, Grixis Affinity, and the Broodschale decks. I would say that Burn is not in the tier 0 range, because people have been used to managing facing Burn for a very, very long time, but the deck still can go way over the top of you and easily win the game. Now, yellow highlighted here, I've considered to be the tier 1.5. Some of these decks are rising from previous tiers or slightly pushed down from being tier 1. These would be Gruul Ramp and Blue Terror, which used to be just the top 5 decks, but now it's kind of come down a bit as sideboards have changed. And then Mono Blue Fairies, after Skura did very well in Paupergeddon, have really risen to be a force in the metagame. While I still think that they are very high power level, I would consider it to be tier 1.5 because it's not something that's just destroying, well, not destroying, but running the metagame as is the 3 tier 1 decks. Gruul Ramp has dropped off a little bit because of the inclusion of the Toxin Analysis or the Death Touch combo with Krark-Clan Shaman, which effectively wipes the ground, which may have made a change into how Blue Terror is seen. We also have a newcomer, Jund Wildfire, created by Walker735 and Giorgio Combo, which was included after the Summer Paupergeddon, after MH3, where they moved from their Gruul Ramp / Ponza into this Jund Wildfire. Now, Walker has told me that he believes Jund Wildfire is simply better than Grixis Affinity. That remains to be seen. I still think that people are gunning for specifically Grixis Affinity. And once we get into how the decks work, that you can maybe see where the power level lies. I think mostly about the free spells. So now, tier 2, highlighted in orange, we have Dredge. Really awesome combo graveyardy deck that can do a lot of sweet things. We have Madness Burn, which uses discard effects to create burn spells. It lines up pretty well against things because it has a life gain package, a lot of flyers. We have Dimir Fairies and Turbo Fog. So Turbo Fog being the deck that looks to simply take no damage and win eventually via milling, or in the black-green version, blasting your opponent maybe with Crypt Rats. In tier 4, we have Dimir Terror, simply falling off a lot because it has to play tap lands, whereas Blue Terror does not, although it does have the strength of having removal spells. And we have Glint Blade, which I'm not sure why it's doing super well. It may line up decently against Burn and the Broodschale sometimes. We have Izzet Terror here. This is a very powerful deck. It seems to be very good against Burn in my opinion, but it's dropping off as the one of the premier decks in the format can simply duress their way through that deck. We also have in tier 3, I forgot to mention the Elves deck. This mono green Elves deck has been doing relatively well recently. And then I miscategorized, but I believe Wall's combo would be in tier 4. Even though very powerful, it's easily disrupted by the Krark-Clan Shaman. We also have in tier 4 of the metagame percentages, Mono White, Bogles, Familiars, and Cycle Storm. I believe all these decks are powerful enough to win a tournament, but I think that they are playing the matchup lottery, and that's something that we'll have to consider. So each of these decks, Burn, Grixis Affinity, and Brute Scale combo, has a lot of basically auto wins in the format. Grixis, let's go ahead and get into what they look like. In aggro deck, this would be your choice. Now, if we get into the Grixis Affinity deck, this deck is playing things like Mirror Enforcer, which is a 0 mana 4/4, Refurbished Familiar, which is a 1 mana 2/1 that discards your opponent. They have Krark-Clan Shaman, which says sacrifice an artifact, deals 1 damage to each creature without flying. Combining that with Hunter's Blowgun or Toxin Analysis can give the Krark-Clan Shaman Death Touch, sacrificing a single artifact to completely wipe all of the creatures that are not flying. This deck plays Galvanic Blast and Cast Down as removal spells, but Galvanic Blast is reach and Makeshift Munitions is reach. They even have enough flex slots to play Kenku Artificer, which turns their artifact indestructible bridges into 3/3 indestructible artifact creatures with flying, which is very powerful. And Nile Spellbound in the main deck. They have 8, 9, 10, 11 card draw in the main. So this deck can grind right through you. The card draw plus the Blood Fountain to recur, it's very, very powerful. Now, the other tier 0/1 that I have defined is Golgari Brute Scale combo. I'm sure that you've seen this before, but if you're new to Pauper, the way this works is Basking Brute Scale is a 2/2 with Adapt for 1 and a green. When you adapt it, you put a +1/+1 counter on it. And this creature, whenever it gets a +1/+1 counter, creates an Eldrazi spawn. It's 0/1 that you can sacrifice to add a colorless mana. Now, Sadistic Glee is the old card that happens to combo with this, where it says whenever a creature dies, you put a +1/+1 counter on it, and that gives you an infinitely sized creature with infinite colorless mana. Now, with their infinite colorless mana, as long as you have black mana here, some decks do play Energy Refractor to move that colored mana into black mana. You continue to draw your deck with things like Deadly Dispute and Eviscerator's Insight, sacrificing your Wellspring until you find your Nadir's Nightblade and drain your opponent and just win the game. So the Brute Scale combo can kill you as early as turn 3. They can play the Brute Scale on turn 2, Sadistically on turn 3, and adapt with that 3 total mana, just attacking for lethal. The package of this deck is very, very small. It's just 2 cards to make infinite, and that allows them to play a large number of interaction with 4 Duress, 4 Safekeeping. This player is even playing a Troublemaker Oof in the main deck. And the new changes are Shambling Ghast, which Shambling Ghast can be sacrificed to give a creature -1/-1, really working against Grixis Affinity's Krark-Clan Shaman, so you can stop that from hurting you. The Jund version of the deck is playing the same combo package, but playing Writhing Chrysalis. Writhing Chrysalis is a powerhouse of the format. This creature is a 2 red-green or a 2/3 devoid with reach. Whenever you sacrifice another Eldrazi, it gets a +1/+1 counter. It comes as when you cast it, you get 2 spawns, meaning that immediately becomes essentially a red-green 4/5 with reach, which is extremely strong. When you have multiple of them in play, they get even bigger. Now, this combines with the Basking Brute Scale combo because every time you sacrifice a spawn, it gets bigger. The Brute Scale combo involves the spawns. Now you have another infinite outlet. This deck also plays 1 Makeshift Munitions, which can, once you make infinite mana, you can now sacrifice infinite number of spawns to shoot your opponent again. They're trimming on the protection package with just 3 Duress and 3 Safekeeping and 3 Shambling Ghast in order to fit the Writhing Chrysalis. So they're taking a bit more of a mid-range approach while still being very, very powerful and lean. They only have 4 tap lands in the deck with the Colony Garden, basically generating plants that you can sacrifice to your draw spells. And these Twisted Landscapes can be cycled later or find your Singleton Mountain. Very strong. Now getting into the tier 1.5, we have Gruul Ramp. So this deck is looking to slam a enchantment as soon as possible, play on turn 2, playing a 3-drop of Eldrazi Repurposer or Jewel Thief, Or if you have a turn 1 Arbor Elf and 2 Forest in play, you can play a Wild Growth or a Utopia Sprawl and play one of your 4 drops on turn 2, being Bannerhide Krushock or Writhing Chrysalis. These are very, very strong plays on turn 2 for sure, and they get card advantage with Avenging Hunter. So Avenging Hunter ETB takes the initiative. If you're not familiar, the initiative is a emblem that gives you a very large amount of advantages. We won't go into all of it works here. This player has been doing quite well lately. They're specifically playing for Boarding Party, which is a Cascade threat, and they have 4 Nyxborn Hydra, a newer card from Modern Horizons 3 that essentially acts like a green fireball. When you have a very large Writhing Chrysalis, your opponent can simply chump it. But if you put Nyxborn Hydra on it, now it's going to be very, very, very big and have trample, just slamming right in. Here 1.5 continues with Jund Wildfire. So this is very similar to Affinity, playing artifact lands, but they are playing a lot of basics and the Twisted Landscapes, combining it with Cleansing Wildfire, which says destroy target land. Its controller may search their library for a basic, put it onto the battlefield, tap, then shuffle, and you draw a card. Essentially making this a 2-mana Rampant Growth that draws you a card, as long as you're targeting one of your own bridges, which is extremely strong. They're playing Duress in the main deck but you could also be playing the Krark-Clan Shaman Toxin Analysis combo, which is useful to wipe the board, and that would be a meta call specifically. They get a lot of value out of their Deadly Dispute and Eviscerator's Insights, and they get to play the best cards in the format, the Modern Horizons 3 cards with, like I said, Eviscerator's Insight, Nyxborn Hydra, Refurbished Familiar, and Writhing Chrysalis. Now you'll notice that a lot of these decks, as we move, are playing the card Snuff Out, which says if you control a swamp, you can pay 4 life rather than the spell's mana cost to destroy target non-black creature. It can't be regenerated. Let's look at what creature we want to destroy all the time. That's Basking Brewscale. It's non-black. Every single deck that can play black or is playing black will be playing 4 Snuff Outs. So if you haven't picked this card up yet and you want to get into Pauper, you might want to. The next deck we're going to look at is Mono Blue Fae. Like I said, this is a sort of up-and-coming deck. This deck relies on having a 1-drop like Fairy Miscreant or Fairy Seer, attacking in on turn 2 to Ninja, Moon-Circuit Hacker, and Ninja the Deep Hours. Both of these will get you card advantage. Moon-Circuit Hacker draws on the first hit and will loot from there on out, and Ninja the Deep Hours will always draw a card when it hits the player. Of course, this is a May ability for both of them. You have interaction in Snap, Counterspell, Spellstutter Sprite, Spell Pierce. They even have Snaremaster Sprite to lock down opposing Chrysalis, and Brinebarrow Intruder to make combat math miserable for your opponent. You have 4 of One Mind as your draw spell engine in the deck, but really you're looking to get a creature in play, get ninjas, and then tempo your opponent. The reason this deck is quite powerful in the metagame is mostly down to the fact that it's all based around 1 and 2 drops. So you have a 1-drop, a 1-drop, 1-drop. A lot of things happen at flash or instant speed. And then in the sideboard, they're playing 5 Hydroblast / Blue Elemental Blast effects that manage burn very well. They have Bind the Monster to deal with the Writhing Chrysalis, 3 Annuls, and 2 Steel Sabotage. These are very good against the Affinity deck, and then Echoing Truth as a flex slot here. The Mono Blue Terror is very similar in the sideboard. Echoing Truth, Steel Sabotage, Hydroblast, Blue Elemental Blast, and then Annul. But the way this deck works is you're going to be milling yourself with things like Mental Note and Thought Scour, and then playing a 1-mana 5/5 with Ward 2, which is very strong. Also, Cryptic Serpent is a 2-mana 6/5, doesn't have Ward, so it's not quite as good. But this deck really becomes more of a Delver deck. You're looking to go land, Delver, pass, and tempo your opponent out of the game once again. It's very, very strong into things that are looking to take their time setting up, and it relies on having a lot of, well, all basic lands and Lorien Revealed to get the basic lands, so you can do a lot with this deck. The neat tech in the main deck is really Sleep of the Dead. This is a sweet card because it says tap target creature doesn't untap. You can essentially push your creatures through that way, but you can escape it for 2 and a blue, and since you're filling up your graveyard with things like Mental Note and Thought Scour, it does a very good job of continuously tapping down your opponent's creatures. If you do need to go wide, this deck is playing a Singleton Murmuring Mystic in the sideboard, which can spit out hundreds of birds as you continue to move. Moving on to tier 2, we have Dimir Fairies. This becomes tier 2 simply because it doesn't play all untapped lands. If we had something like untapped fetch lands in Pauper, this would probably be tier 1 because it can play the Brainstorm package, it can play Ninja the Deep Hours, but it also can play Snuff Out, a 0 mana removal spell, and Thorn of the Black Rose. If you're new to Pauper, Thorn of the Black Rose gives you the Monarch. Monarch says it's an emblem where at the end of your turn, you draw a card. The ridiculous, this has been a card advantage engine in Pauper for a very long time and can accrue tons and tons of value. Also being a blue deck, they get to play a lot of Hydroblast and a Null. They have a couple of tech sideboard cards as well here. Now Dredge is a fan favorite to be sure. This deck relies on playing creatures that mill you, Blanchwood Prowler, Circle the Land Druid, and Satyr Wayfinder, and eventually dredging with Stinkweed Imp, which has Dredge 5, and eventually getting a Lotleth Giant into play. I'm sorry if you can't see this very well, but Lotleth Giant is a 6/5, says when it enters the battlefield, it deals 1 damage to target opponent for each creature card in your graveyard. You get this into the play by using Dread Return to sacrifice some creatures, which you're already playing mill creatures on purpose. You Dread Return, sacrificing those mill creatures, and blasting your opponent. You also have a neat little combo of Troll of Khazad-dûm Swamp Cycling, or Generous Ent, cycling for a forest, and then casting Exhume on that really early. This lines up against the metagame pretty well because you have big creatures, you also have Knot of the Bone, which can be very, very good against the mono red deck. Madness Burn in tier 2 as well. This deck is relying on things like Faithless Looting, Grab the Prize, Highway Robbery, Voldaren Epicure, Vampire's Kiss. All these things create discard outlets, letting you discard things like Alms of the Vein, Fiery Temper, and Kitchen Imp. But the sweetest upgrade lately has been Sneaky Snacker from Modern Horizons 3, a 2/1 that ETBs from your graveyard tapped when you draw your 3rd card in any turn. So on your turn, you can play Grab the Prize, discard your Sneaky Snacker, deal them 2 damage, and get it immediately back, which is very strong. Tier 2 is closing out with Turbo Fog. Turbo Fog. People do love this. I know Carl from Card Market loves it. Essentially, you're looking to play lots and lots of fogs, and eventually mill your opponent with Stream of Thought. Stream of Thought says target player mills 4 cards, shuffle up to 4 from your graveyard into your library, and you can replicate it. So in the end game, you just replicate it a ton and dome them. The black-green version, instead of playing counterspells and cantrips and stuff, you're playing the same amount of fogs, but playing the Deadly Dispute Eviscerator's Insight package with Ichor Wellspring, plenty of ways to draw cards, and 4 Campfire. So this deck just eventually basically is trying to never die. You do have Crypt Rats to deal your opponent very large amounts of damage near the end game, so you're going to be using your swamps to play that. It also has things like Troll and Generous Ent, Thorn of the Black Rose for lots and lots of value. Tier 3 Dimir Terror here. Now, once again, just like the Dimir Fae, Dimir Terror becomes at least a tier down because it is playing tap lands. We have 4 Contaminated Aquifer, 1 Ice Tunnel to fetch up with our Lorien Revealed. The benefit of playing this deck specifically would be the Snuff Out. Also, potentially better versus mono red since they can play the Unexpected Fangs. Puts a +1/+1 and lifelink counter on a creature. You also have some amount of sweepers in the sideboard with Arms of Hadar and Suffocating Fumes. Tier 3 still, we're over here with Elves. Elves has played not always mono green. Sometimes they play a lot of different blue sideboard cards, but this deck is looking to play your Mana Dorks, your Quirion Ranger, get the Priest of Titania in play, which says add green for each elf on the battlefield, and then play huge stuff. Avenging Hunter is a mega threat, but the biggest threat is Timberwatch Elf, and you can also make your creatures lethal in 1 turn with Nyxborn Hydra. If you had 10 elves in play, you can tap the Priest of Titania, untap it, tap it again, Nyxborn Hydra on an elf, and attack it for 20. Definitely a green fireball there. Tier 3 of Izzet Terror. Like I said before, this deck is very strong. This specific list is playing a Galvanic Discharge and Tune the Narrative package, but with a lot of cheap removal spells, you can keep people back. You can also Breath Weapon, and this player chose to play 4 Cast into the Fire. You can see that this is a good main deck choice because of all the bridges that are being played in the metagame right now. Eventually, you're going to land a Crimson Fleet Commodore or Azure Fleet Admiral and take over with the Monarch, using Murmuring Mystic or Tolarian Terror as your win conditions. Orzhov Blade. This deck, I know people really enjoy more of the lower tier decks because they're more fun to play, but this deck looks to play Glinthawk and Core Skyfisher, picking up your refurbished familiar as many times as possible. They also have Okiba Gang Shinobi, which can ninjutsu a Glinthawk, and then you can, or Core Skyfisher, then you can Core Skyfisher back the Okiba Gang, and then Okiba Gang back the Core Skyfisher with a little loop, as long as your opponent doesn't have flyers. And they have Tithing Blade to clear up creatures, Cast Down, Raven Charm. Raven Charm has been a powerhouse in the current format. It says 1 and a white, it deals damage equal to twice the number of creatures you control to target creature. You can destroy an enchantment, or you can exile any number of target players' graveyards. Giving white access to instant speed graveyard removal has been a huge boon. And that's shown up a little bit in the mono white deck, which we tier 4 of Bogles. Bogles just won a challenge. You'd think it's not tier 4, but essentially it lines up very, very well against mono red and simply does not line up well against the Krark Clan Shaman plus Toxin Analysis combo, which can easily kill your creatures. People are very prepared, and they have that a lot in their main decks. We're looking to play a Bogle or a Gladecover Scout Ledgewalker. All these things have hexproof, and then we're going to make it big with Ancestral Mask and Ethereal Armor. And the big benefit of this deck is that you have Spirit Link and Armadillo Cloak for lifelinky effects and just going way over the top of your mono red opponent. Of course, people are prepared, and it might not be the best choice, but it does steal games. Cycle Storm, tier 4. This deck is extremely powerful, very, very fast, and the only problem is that it's difficult to play sometimes and can lose to very, very effectively piloted decks with good graveyard hate. So Reaping the Graves is return target creature from your graveyard to your hand with Storm. Songs of the Dam adds a black for each creature card in your graveyard. We're playing cycling creatures. Granith Stinger, Granith Healer, Horror, Street Wraith, Carabid, and Vantasaur. We cycle them into our graveyard. We play Cabal Ritual, Dark Ritual, Songs of the Damned. We draw lots of cards with Deadly Dispute on the land, and then build up Storm Count, recycling, draw our entire deck, and eventually you'll cast a Granith Stinger, which says whenever you cycle another card, it deals a damage to each opponent, and you're going to just blast your opponent. I love that deck. It's super fun. Another deck I love, Familiars. This is a list from GN42 who topped the challenge. The reason that this deck is not very high in the metagame, even while it topped the challenge, is because, once again, tap lands, and combining that with things that cost more than 1 mana. We have Muldrifter, Lorien Revealed, Seagate Oracle, Deep Analysis, and Archimancer. It's very, very costly. This deck relies on cost reducers of Sunscape Familiar to make things cost less, eventually having loops like Archaeomancer flicker on an island for 1 mana, creating an infinite loop, making infinite life with Godfaros Faithful. And the real powerhouse of the deck is probably Ephemerate, which can recycle things like Prohibit and Remove Soul for counterspelling, locking your opponent. If you're interested in playing blue-white control, this is probably the deck for you. Now, tier 4 mono-white aggro, it feels bad, but I know J-Waves just recently did well in a challenge. The powerhouse of this deck is Thraben Charm now, the recent upgrade from Modern Horizons 3. Once again, like I said, it deals damage, it destroys an enchantment, it exiles graveyards, and this deck is very, very good against mono red because you have Prismatic Strands in the main deck, you have lots of life gain, you have lots of blockers with Novice Inspector, Thraben Inspector. You're looking to put a lot of creatures on the board, win with a Guardian's Pledge or a Steadfast Unicorn. Our last deck that we want to look at is Walls Combo. I really think this is a sweet deck. It's very fast, but this is one of those decks that does die to Krark Clan Shaman, really keeping it down in the lower power level in the format. You're looking to play a lot of wall creatures, Battlement, Wall of Roots, Axebane, Cerulean Caretaker. Once this taps for a lot of mana, you enchant it with Freed from the Real, or you pair it with the Galvanic Alchemist, you make infinite mana, and then you blast your opponent with Valakut Invoker, which you can find by drawing all your cards. So that is a quick overview of the top decks of the format. Now I wanted to talk about how to approach the metagame. So generally, things in the metagame are going to sort of auto-lose to something. So new combo decks, like bad combo decks, will auto-lose to Brood Scale combo because they have Duress, and they are also faster than you, causing things like Familiars to be weak. Walls combo doesn't get quite as Duressed. Then things like Grixis Affinity, they have the Krark-Clan Shaman combo. Getting rid of Gruul Ramp, like kind of pushing that down. Blue Terror. Mono Blue Fairies is a very, very powerful deck that has a lot of 1-drops. So if you are a slower deck looking to play 1-drops yourself, or even stuff that gets messed up by Spell Pierce, then that could be a problem for you. And Burn, simply being a very, very fast deck, can punish people that are moving slowly. So if you're going to be playing against these decks in the metagame, now I've given you an example of what to expect, and you're going to try to maximize your ability to win against the tier 1 at minimum, while also having game against the tier 2 decks. If you have that and you get the right matchups, then you could crush your next Pauper event. I hope you've enjoyed this intro to Pauper, state of the format. I had a little bit of fun doing it, and let me know what you think. We'll see you in the next video.